In 2022, Russia launched its invasion of Ukraine, wielding one of the largest and most powerful tank fleets ever assembled, comprising a blend of advanced models, like the Tiny Team, alongside enduring Soviet-era workhorses such as the T-72. This formidable armored force was anticipated to be instrumental in securing a decisive and overwhelming victory for Vladimir Putin's troops, bolstering hopes for a swift campaign that would quickly subdue Ukrainian resistance. However, events have unfolded quite differently. Due to a combination of Russia's flawed tactics and significant intelligence shortcomings, paired with Ukraine's determined and courageous defensive resistance, the Russian military has experienced historically unprecedented tank losses and has failed to capitalize on its supposed armor superiority. This outcome was unforeseen, especially given Russia's long-standing renown for its tank production, a legacy dating back to the Soviet Union era. For instance, during World War II, the Soviets deployed some of the most formidable military vehicles of their time, including a legendary T-34, celebrated for its adaptability to harsh conditions despite certain flaws, and the powerful Su-22, capable of annihilating nearly any enemy tank or armored vehicle with a well-aimed shot. Moving into the Cold War period, the Soviet Union maintained its exceptional ability to design and manufacture world-leading tanks, introducing models such as the T-55, one of the most widely produced tanks in history, the T-62 with the world's first smoothbore tank gun, and the T-72, which became the mainstay of Soviet armored forces until the While Russia's newest tanks have yet to be fully tested in combat, there is no doubt about the country's rich heritage of producing tanks that are remarkably robust, versatile, and challenging to defeat. When the full-scale invasion of Ukraine commenced in early 2022, many military analysts highlighted Russia's vast reserves of modern and Soviet-era tanks as one of the Kremlin's greatest assets. Although Ukraine also maintained some older Soviet tanks in reserve, it could not match the sheer volume of armored vehicles available to its adversary. While exact figures are difficult to confirm, multiple sources estimated that Russia had nearly 3,000 operational main battle tanks, NBTS, at the war's outset, with thousands more stored in military depots and facilities across the country, ready for deployment if required. These approximately 3,000 active MBTs included potent variants like the previously mentioned 72, as well as more modern models such as the T-80 and T-90, all recognized as highly effective war machines, armored sufficiently to withstand enemy fire and equipped with firepower capable of destroying any opposition. Analysts predicted that these tanks would overwhelm Ukrainian defenses, leading the Russian advance to a rapid victory and enabling assaults not only in the contested Donbass region, but also toward major Ukrainian cities like Kyiv and Kharkiv. Indeed, the overwhelming armored strength was a key factor behind Putin and his commanders' confidence in a swift victory at the war's onset, as they saw no plausible way for Ukraine to halt these formidable machines from advancing through streets, demolishing buildings, and destroying fortifications. For a brief period, it appeared that this prediction might come true, with Russian forces launching offensives on 5 primary fronts, targeting major urban centers, including Kyiv, and pushing deep into Ukrainian territory with powerful armored columns that seemed unstoppable. Russian forces quickly seized large swaths of territory with remarkable speed and efficiency. Meanwhile, Ukraine struggled to respond effectively, forced to divide its attention among evacuating as many civilians as possible to safer areas, reinforcing defenses in strategically vital towns and cities, and allocating its limited resources where they were most needed. It seemed as though Russia was on track to accomplish its initial objectives, with its massive tank fleet proving its effectiveness as the country's military captured square mile after square mile. However, by the end of spring 2022, the situation had dramatically shifted. Russia's advance not only slowed but stalled completely, and in many regions, Ukrainian forces began pushing the invaders back. Areas that had been captured by Russia were reclaimed by Ukrainian defenders, putting the Kremlin's army on the defensive. This forced a shift in Russian strategy, transitioning from large-scale combat operations to smaller assault units. Consequently, Russian forces withdrew from their northern front around Kyiv and Sumy oblasts, redirecting their focus toward the eastern regions. Meanwhile, their losses escalated dramatically as tanks once thought invincible were destroyed by the determined Ukrainian defenders. Although years have passed since those early months, Russia has yet to return to the tactics that initially proved so effective. Instead, it continues to rely on smaller infantry units, often operating without significant armor support, aiming to seize ground and achieve objectives incrementally rather than overwhelming opponents with massive armored divisions and dominant tank formation. This strategic shift has been thoroughly analyzed by US Army veteran and author Brian Powers, who detailed the factors driving Russia's move towards smaller, predominantly dismounted infantry offensives in an article published on the official US Army website. Powers highlights the rapid proliferation of unmanned aerial systems on Ukraine's battlefields as a crucial factor that transformed the combat environment, forcing both sides to rethink their tactics. Another key reason for Russia's inability to mount large-scale assaults along critical front lines, Powers explains, is the catastrophic losses of main battle tanks, MBTs, and armored vehicles sustained during the conflict. Although the exact number of destroyed or damaged tanks is unknown, estimates clearly number in the thousands. For instance, open-source intelligence group Oryx has visually confirmed over 4,300 Russian tank losses in Ukraine since the invasion began, along with more than 8,700 armored and infantry fighting vehicles destroyed or disabled. Considering that the International Institute for Strategic Studies 2021 military balance estimated Russia had between 2,800 and 30 operational tanks at the war's outset, these losses represent as much as 143% of Russia's entire operational tank force. Russia has lost more tanks than it initially had. Powers notes that these figures constitute the largest armored vehicle losses Russia has suffered since World War II and exceed total armored vehicle losses sustained by Russia and the Soviet Union in all conflicts from 1946 to 2022 combined. This is an exceptionally damning statistic, corroborated by solid data. WWII. For comparison, during the Soviet-Afghan War, which lasted from 1979 through the 1980s, Soviet forces lost approximately 147 main battle tanks, a figure dwarfed by the current conflict's losses. Between the end of World War II and the onset of the Ukraine invasion, Russia lost approximately 665 tanks across various conflicts. 6 in the Russia-Moldova War of 1992, 192. In the First Chechen War, 23. In the First Chechen War, 23. In the Second Chechen War, 4. In the Russo-Georgian War, and an estimated 100 in the Donbass War. This number pales in comparison to the tank losses Russia has suffered since 2022. Some sources even suggest the figures are higher. For instance, the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine claims that Ukraine has destroyed or captured nearly 10,000 Russian tanks and over 20,000 armored fighting vehicles, a staggering figure that highlights the intensity of the ongoing conflict. While these numbers might be somewhat exaggerated, multiple independent open-source intelligence groups, organizations, and analysts concur that Russia has lost thousands of tanks due to Ukraine's effective and evolving use of drones, mines, anti-tank guided missiles, and other advanced anti-tank weaponry, which have severely weakened Russian armored capability. With the conflict ongoing and no clear resolution in sight, Russia is approaching a critical shortage of tanks, a situation that could have long-term implications for its military effectiveness. Recent open-source intelligence reports indicate that Russia currently has fewer than 3,000 tanks in storage, with more than half of these considered to be in poor condition due to neglect, age, or combat damage. Less than a quarter of these tanks are deemed operational for modern battlefield conditions, and the vast majority are outdated models, with fewer than 100 relatively modern T-80 main battle tanks available, highlighting Russia's heavy reliance on aging Soviet-era technology. This stark reality underscores Russia's heavy reliance on Soviet-era tanks stored away for decades. Russian forces have frequently been seen dragging out rusty, old relics from dusty storage facilities to replace those destroyed in combat, deploying tanks that are 50, 60, or even over 70 years old, such as the T-54s and T-55s, which first entered service in the late 1940s and early 1950s. Experts have long debated the causes behind this situation, and it is clear that no single factor explains Russia's dramatic tank losses. Instead, a complex combination of factors has converged, decimating the Kremlin's armored fleet and forcing Russian troops to fight with minimal armored support. One significant factor is Russia's overconfidence and flawed tactics at the war's outset. Many in Moscow initially believed Ukraine would capitulate easily, expecting little resistance and imagining that many Ukrainians would greet Russian forces as liberators with open arms, a misjudgment that severely underestimated the Ukrainian will to resist. Misled by false intelligence from the Federal Security Service, FSB, Russia's leadership entered the conflict expecting it to be resolved within days. Consequently, they failed to meticulously plan the invasion with the strategic precision and intelligence necessary for success. They assumed their larger, ostensibly stronger force would overwhelm any opposition swiftly, raising the Russian flag over Kyiv in weeks or even days. This overconfidence contributed to substantial tank losses early on, partly because Russian tanks were often deployed haphazardly, rather than advancing in carefully structured formations, supported by infantry to protect against flanking maneuvers and surprise attacks. As a result, many tanks were isolated, ambushed, and destroyed by Ukrainian forces. Additionally, early in the war, there were reports of civilians capturing Russian tanks, or attacking them with Molotov cocktails and improvised weapons, underscoring the chaotic and underestimated resistance that Russian forces faced. Russia was caught off guard by the rapid and substantial aid Ukraine received from global allies early in the conflict, which profoundly altered the tactical landscape and challenged many of Russia's pre-existing assumptions about the level and immediacy of international support. The UK and US moved quickly to supply Ukrainian forces with powerful anti-tank weapons that were instrumental in shifting battlefield dynamics. For instance, the US sent roughly 5,000 Javelin missiles by April 2022, and the UK delivered over 4,000 in-laws by late March of the same year. These advanced fire-and-forget rockets are specifically designed to strike tanks from above, targeting the thinner armor on top, which enabled Ukrainians to effectively destroy heavily armored Russian tanks that might otherwise have been nearly impervious to standard weaponry. In addition to these Western-supplied armaments, Ukrainian forces adeptly utilized their own extensive anti-tank arsenal, including mines, a variety of missiles, and artillery systems, while leveraging their intimate knowledge of local terrain to execute ambushes, guerrilla tactics, and hit-and-run attacks against Russian tank columns. Almost every Russian tank deployed in the conflict exhibited exploitable weaknesses, which Ukraine's forces systematically targeted to maximize damage. The T-72, which serves as the backbone of Russia's ground forces and is one of the most widely produced tanks in the world, is relatively lightweight and inexpensive to manufacture but contains a critical design flaw. Its ammunition is stored in the turret in a manner that makes it highly vulnerable to a single missile or drone strike, often resulting in catastrophic explosions that destroy the entire vehicle and kill its crew. The Ukrainians, many of whom are familiar with Soviet-era tanks and their quirks, have expertly exploited these vulnerabilities, causing disproportionate losses among T-72 variants, such as the T-72A and T-72I. Moreover, Russia has been forced to deploy a number of older tanks dating back to the Cold War era, including the T-62, which are largely obsolete and ill-suited to the demands of modern combat, making them particularly vulnerable to mines, drones, and precision-guided missiles employed by Ukrainian forces. With numerous modern tanks either lost, damaged, or incapacitated, Russia increasingly relies on these outdated models that offer limited protection against Ukraine's evolving and technologically advanced defense measures. Even Russia's most advanced tanks, like the T-14 Armata, have seen only limited deployment due to a combination of high production costs, limited manufacturing capacity, and the significant risk of losing such expensive assets to relatively inexpensive Western-supplied weapons, factors compounded by ongoing economic difficulties and international sanctions. The T-9 team, Russia's upgraded main battle tank featuring enhanced armor targeting systems, further underscores the challenges Russia faces in modern armored warfare. Despite its improvements, these advanced tanks remain vulnerable to asymmetric tactics and the latest anti-armor technologies employed by Ukraine. This situation vividly reflects the evolving nature of mechanized combat in Ukraine, where traditional tank superiority is increasingly contested by innovative defensive strategies, precision weaponry, and the critical role of international military support, all of which have combined to reshape the battlefield in ways few analysts anticipated at the war's outset, fundamentally altering the strategic calculus for both sides as they add it to a rapidly changing conflict. Recently, the country has announced an increase in production rates for this specific tank, with factories reportedly producing new units at record levels. However, Ukrainian soldiers still report only occasional sightings of the T-9 item along the front lines and in occupied areas. This discrepancy is largely attributed to concerns about the tank's high cost, as each unit can exceed $4 million to manufacture. Additionally, Russia is apprehensive about its military reputation, fearing a significant blow if it deploys these advanced tanks only to have them systematically destroyed by Ukrainian forces. Ultimately, it makes little difference whether Russia uses older or newer tanks, as none have proven effective enough to help the country achieve its military objectives or break through Ukrainian defenses. Instead, Ukraine has consistently demonstrated an ability to neutralize whatever Russia deploys, often employing drones to devastating effect. This conflict has become heavily defined by drone warfare more than any other previous conflict. Russia frequently uses drones to bombard Ukrainian towns and cities, causing civilian casualties and damaging residential buildings and infrastructure. Conversely, Ukraine deploys a growing and increasingly lethal drone arsenal to target Russia's most critical military assets, including tanks and armored vehicles, effectively negating the Kremlin's substantial armored advantage. The war has now reached a point where Russia not only has fewer tanks available, but is also increasingly reluctant to use them due to the enemy's mastery in destroying even the toughest and largest tanks. Kremlin commanders are at a loss over how to counter this threat. Analysts note that Russia has essentially been forced to launch near-suicidal armored assaults, sometimes involving just two isolated vehicles or outdated tanks fitted with makeshift defenses like cage armor, improvised plating, and other metal additions meant to protect against first-person view, FPV, drone attacks, and drone-drop munitions. A U.S. Army veteran explains that the coordinated movements of trained vehicle crews and tactical unit formations, once characteristic of Russian tactics, are now conspicuously absent. Instead, Russian officers are ordering troops to advance as fast as possible against Ukrainian positions, a strategy that often results in immediate chaos. While one expert describes Russia's approach as failed and futile, the Center for Strategic and International Studies, CSS, noted in November 2025 that Russia continues to adapt its tactics, experimenting with new methods to breach Ukrainian defenses. Still, the expert argues that the Kremlin remains stubbornly attached to ineffective systems and persists with repeatedly failed approaches. The Russian army is literally being decimated because it is impossible to win or effectively fight a war of this nature without adequate armored support. Military objectives remain unmet. Progress is slow and gains minimal because troops struggle to succeed without the backing of tanks or even armored vehicles. Yet, Russia seems indifferent to this reality. Putin and his commanders continue to expend resources and sacrifice soldiers in futile assaults and pointless operations, failing to leverage the significant advantage early in the war. The longer the situation persists, the more unsustainable it becomes. With Russia continuing to falter in numerous areas, Putin is likely regretting not having utilized his tank advantage more strategically at the conflict's outset. You can now explore Russia's continuing struggles in this video, which examines how the Kremlin's formerly strong front line is beginning to break apart and fall apart. Additionally, there's an in-depth analysis discussing how Putin's final phase is already underway, portraying the Russian president as trapped between difficult choices with no escape, facing only hardship ahead. Lastly, to stay updated with the most recent breaking news from Ukraine's front lines, be sure to subscribe to our channel and activate notifications so you can be among the first worldwide to receive our newest reports.